Hey, everybody. I'm Tammy Key-Kafer. I'm a licensed clinical social worker.
And my name is Desiree Grimaldi. Welcome to the Unguarded Mind podcast, unfiltered, raw, gritty drama and trauma that life throws at you. Today we have a special guest, Renzo. He was born in Peru and was educated at the University of Florida, leaving with a BA in English, specializing in Victorian literature, and an MA in mass communication, specializing in intercultural communication. You currently reside in Miami and prioritize traveling in order to experience and be exposed to the tenets of the culture. And you strongly believe that it is through art that we find the truth and pathways of communication with others. And we would love to dive into that because you have a really intriguing story, and I just don't think I will do it justice based on a bio. But we would love to dive in and start on your journey leaving Peru, what caused you to leave Peru, and where that's led you.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Desiree, Tammy. It's a pleasure to be here with you. And thank you for sharing your platform with me. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
As far as leaving Peru, so it's it's a little bit of a crazy story. My father was a major in the army. He was a pilot, and my mother was the secretary to the Minister of Health. And one time, there's a terrorist organization in Peru named Shining Path, Sendero Luminoso, and they were representatives of that organization in a union meeting with the Minister of Health. And my mom was his secretary. So because she was a woman, she's like, "Hey, do you guys want coffee?" Because they came armed to the meeting.
Wow.
And they're like, "Yeah, sure." So she went and got the cops because they were like, "Nobody leaves." And she got around it, but that marked her for death. So one of our nannies ended up being a terrorist that infiltrated. One of the nurses, when my sister was born in the hospital, ended up being a terrorist. And then there was another incident. Actually, when my father passed, I went through his office to pick up his things, get the probate stuff ready, and I found all of the deposition from the trial, and it reads like a soap opera. So because of that, we left Peru and came to the
Wow.
United States. Yeah.
So you and your mom and your sister left? Because did you say had your dad passed in Peru?
My dad passed in 2020, about almost 4 years
Oh,
ago from pancreatic cancer. But no, we all left Peru. We all
oh,
left Peru in 1989.
wow. And so, yeah, okay. So what was it hard to get out?
No, but unfortunately, like my dad had a pretty brilliant military career, and he
Mhm.
was, dishonorably discharged for it, for leaving, abandoning. Um,
Mhm.
but he followed his family. My mom was like, "I'm leaving," and luckily her big brother was here. He actually sponsored my student visa, so I was lucky enough not to be legal the entire time I was here. And
Wow.
that's very lucky. Not a lot of people in that situation can say that.
Uh-huh.
I'm very
Yeah.
grateful to my godfather for that.
Wow. That gives me goosebumps how you were saying how the nanny was mixed up in the tears,
Yeah.
the doctor, the nurse when your sister was born. I was just thinking, holy cow, you're trusting these people in these roles. And wow.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely leaves a mark, right? I grew up um really I hate using the word, but hating, right? Like these people tried to kill me, etc. But then when you take a look at some of the situation, right? I think there was an agrarian reform in the late 70s where Peru just took away the the industries from some of the owners and gave it to the people because it was a leftist government, but they didn't educate the people on how to run it, and they paid the owners with the new currency that didn't have any value. And then you couple that with El Nino destroying the fishing industry, which was pretty big for Peru in the beginning of the 80s, you're going to have widespread poverty. And what are you going to do if somebody says, "Hey, those people over there have three TVs and your children are starving. Here's a gun." Like you have to have some empathy for it. I'm not excusing it, but I can understand.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
And this is a little off, but speaking to other people from other countries, what is happening in the US is very triggering for them, coming from seeing things like you did. And I Is it triggering for you? I'm sure you have strong opinions, and we're obviously not like a political podcast or
Sure.
anything like that. But I mean, mental health wise, like seeing certain things that are happening here, are they triggering for you?
They are in a way. So part of the reason that I wrote the book is connection, right? Like I've been blessed to be able to travel late in my, like when I turned 33 is when I was able to start traveling, right? So for a long time, because we came here, just to go back to it, we went from like upper middle class or lower upper class to having nothing. Like I had my godfather sponsored my visa, but he couldn't, maintain my parents. We had support, but not really. So I grew up seeing my parents say, I was maybe 6, 7 years old when they were like, "Hey, go have dinner. We already ate," knowing that they lied,
Wow.
but not understanding the context of why. And that marked me. I was very Scarlett O'Hara, right? As God is my witness, my family will not go hungry again, right? So I grew up that way. And when you asked me what I wanted, like, who do you want to be? I said, I want to have money because money equals safety. Money equals eating. Money equals nobody turning the lights off on you, right? Um, and I wasn't able to travel because there was no money for it. That's a luxury not a lot of people have. That's to put it in perspective. Everything you see on Instagram of people traveling, that's a very select group of people. There's the majority of people live and die 5 miles from when they were born, if you look at the statistics, right? But I did have a lot of what my family gave me was a love of learning and books and literature and things to read and things to delve into. So when I look at some of the things that are happening now, um, I think it's a lack of knowledge and I think it's a lack of empathy. And those books gave me knowledge and traveling gave me empathy. Other things gave me empathy, right? But you see things from somebody else's shoes when you go and immerse yourself in their culture. You understand how somebody can have a differing viewpoint if you read about it, if you have a conversation with somebody that grew up differently from you. So when I see what's happening now for me, and there is in the book that I wrote, there is a political undercurrent to it. There can't not be. We don't exist separate from it. To me, it comes from a lack of empathy and a lack of knowledge.
What is your book called again?
Still,
Still. And it's on Amazon.
it's on Amazon. We actually became an Amazon bestseller in a number of categories about 2 weeks ago. So that's really cool.
Wow.
It's on Amazon right now too. Thank you.
Still. Education and empathy, those two factors are crucial.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think
And you're
so.
right, education from just reading a book or just studying something, in your history class or whatever, that it doesn't provide the education of immersing yourself and being able to travel. But also I was just thinking, I'm in Colorado, Denver's 5 minutes away from here,
Mhm.
and going traveling into the city, um, that's immersing yourself in a different culture from the, you know, being on the outside. So you might not have to travel very far to see how people are doing, how people are living, what their conditions, yeah.
Yeah, take a road trip, right? Like when I started traveling, I started with Europe, but one of the reasons I started with Europe, other than a lot of the authors that I read were European, is that you drive for 5 hours and you hit three different countries, right? Like it's a
Bigger than like all the countries in Europe put together.
yeah, it's like a
To leave the US to be well traveled
Right.
with the
yeah,
size of it.
exactly. For me, it was that immigrant mentality. I have X amount of dollars, let me hit as much as I can
Yeah.
for the amount of money I have, right? So yeah.
And so coming where you came, so you came over here to the United States. How old were you when your family came over?
Four,
About
five,
4.
4 to 5, around there. Yeah.
And just the struggles that you had with your parents trying to protect you as much as they could to say, hey, go eat, without saying we're starving, but we want you to eat. How long did that way of life continue for you before certain things changed?
Oh, the entire time being an immigrant, like, and this is that part when we'll get to mental health, right? This is where it affects you. It's just there was always something. Like when September 11th happened, both my parents worked in the import-export industry. That went down. If you remember, if you were around during that time,
Yeah.
anything import-export, anything having to do with airlines, anything having to do with cargo,
Shut down. Yeah.
shut down. They both lost my dad lost his job. My mom had to take less money. Um, it was hard. There's always struggles, right? So that's why it was very important for us to get scholarships, for us to get an education. But in my opinion, that, having a good education and succeeding is a myth. The American dream in that sense can be a myth because you don't necessarily get a good education. And I'm not going to get into what I think about the university and higher education system and how it's structured as a business right now. But it really does. You getting a degree doesn't guarantee you the job. You're told you get a degree, you get the grades, you'll get the job that you want. Well, I graduated grad school in 2009. That's the year of the bubble. Nobody that graduated with me did anything that has to do with their careers.
Yeah.
So the struggles were always there. I think what was important is it teaches you adaptability. It teaches you that I was somebody who tried to control everything. I was a project manager when I came up actually too. Like we are here to mitigate risks. You can't control the weather, right? How many plans have you ever made that have gone according to plan? I'll tell you for me, zero.
Uh-huh.
But what plans do is they allow you to adapt. And that's the skill I think that leads to greater, almost on a path to joy. Adaptability can lead to joy.
And it's a life skill that you have to have. If you are a rigid person, rigidity, perfectionistic, it has to be this way, my way, like you can do it, but you're going to have a rough road because without that ability to adjust and adapt to the situations that are presented to you. Yeah.
Yeah, you're definitely describing me a number of years ago. Because the way that
And the youth today too, they do not like change. They don't want to pivot. They, as a mother of two younger kids, I mean, they think not only like we all thought we knew everything when we were that age, but they also think that everybody has to accept what they think they know. And we have to tiptoe around their feelings, and they don't understand that
yeah.
it's a big world out there and nobody really gives a shit how you feel.
Well, when people say you're entitled to your opinion, I don't believe that. I think you're entitled to your informed opinion, right? Again, it goes back to information. I think there's a rejection of learnedness in the United States right now, maybe across the world in different countries, where it's like, if you are seen as somebody who's intellectual, that's something to not appreciate versus what it used to mean a few years ago. And there's some elitism probably that has played into that part, but I've never felt knowledge as rejected as it is now versus what I feel like I like this versus this is the fact of this, right? And I think that comes from, again, a lack of safety, just like your fundamental needs have to be met in order for you to feel good. To go back to talking about perfectionism. The way that I grew up, I would I learned how to read they say on my own, but I'm sure my parents read to me when I was around 3 years old. So they took me to get an IQ test and they said I was, you know, highly intelligent. That's gone now. That's a quotient that diminishes over time. But my parents were also highly intelligent, but I was more than them. So they were very proud of it, right? And then when we came over and I was in school with that pressure of get your grades, get honor roll, get scholarships, etc. I would come home like 9 years old. I would come home to my dad. Now, let me paint a picture. My dad was an Army major, but he was also Ted Lasso. If you've seen the cover of the book, you saw the mustache. He was goofy. He was loving. He was a really good man, but he was also a very severe man. Nobody is one thing, right? We're complex. So he would be at his desk and I'd present the major, my test, a 95. Doesn't matter that I set the curve, right? Present the test. He'd look at it. Were you sick? Were you emotionally distraught? I'm translating, right? Son, what could you have done differently to get the 5 points you needed to get 100? Okay. I come home with 100. Were you sick? Were you emotionally distraught? Son, I see that there are 2 extra credit questions here you chose not to answer. Why didn't you answer them? Because I knew I had 100. God punishes pride, son. If you want 100, study for 200. End result, I grew up thinking that nothing I did was good enough.
Yeah.
And that, and I think this actually applies to a lot of issues with toxic masculinity that exist in the world right now, that my value was defined by what I could provide,
Mhm.
right? That is a perfect recipe for a perfectionist. And a
Sure.
perfectionist is paralyzed when things don't go perfectly, and nothing ever goes perfectly. So what is the result? Anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Oh, and then when I would bring it up to my dad, growing up, like just, as a man at this point, a younger man, but a man, he'd be like, oh, but look how good you turned out, and laugh and walk away, which would infuriate me.
Wow.
But about 3 weeks before he passed, I was outside. This was during COVID. So we were all living together, taking care of my dad, my sister, her husband, her 3 kids, their 2 dogs, my dog, my mom, and my dad. Imagine this house, right? So during COVID, I made like a makeshift gym outside, and I would work out there. My dad actually, they gave him 3 months. He lasted for 2.5, for almost 3 years. And for 2.5, he didn't need morphine. He was doing kettlebells. He was doing great. But this was towards the end. So he came out to get some air and sit in the sun. And I was doing yoga. Now, my dad was also very Catholic. He's like Ned Flanders, but Catholic, super Catholic. And I was doing yoga, and he said, hey, I'm worried about your immortal soul. I'm worried about your immortal soul. And that normally that would trigger me because I'm like, oh, right. But that day I had the patience, and I'm like, no, I had a car accident before. And yoga was the only thing that helped me run marathons again and all that stuff. Like, I have a lot of respect for yoga. And then also I told him, my mind is always on the future. Yoga helps me be present. I have to be uncomfortable in the moment so I don't fall on my face. And that led to a long conversation that day. And I don't know if you've ever heard something that you needed to hear, but you didn't know you need to hear it until you heard it.
Mm.
He said, my dad said, I know I made you feel like you weren't good enough growing up.
Wow.
I'm sorry. First time he ever said, I'm sorry. But you were smart, and I didn't know how to handle it because I was proud, and I didn't have the language to tell you what I'm going to tell you now. You're my son. I love you. I know you. You're not happy if you do anything half-assed. Do I still need therapy? Yes. Do I still have a lot of things to go through? Yes. But that's the first time I saw my dad as a little boy who wouldn't get recognized in a household of 3 brothers unless he excelled. My grandfather was a gastrointestinal surgeon. My grandmother was an opera singer, university professor, activist. And the gift he gave me that day was, when I pass by his grave, or when I think, even though we had a great relationship, I would have had some resentment still. He didn't ask, he didn't acknowledge, just acknowledging it, right? But I don't have that.
Mm.
I'm free of that. And that was something he gave me before he went. And that definitely helped out with some of the mental health issues that I deal with.
That was the first time that you ever saw him vulnerable, it sounds like.
Yeah, even with the cancer, like, I saw him vulnerable, but that's the first time I saw him as a child needing love, needing attention, you know?
He was giving you what nobody gave him.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Maybe a little too much, but yeah. I mean, I think we overcompensate. I don't know. I joke around with my sister and my nephew. I always tell him, like, that woman, as your grandmother, my mom, it's like, that's not our mom. That's her mom trying to get to heaven, because it's a completely different person. My mom is awesome, by the way. It's just a teaser, but I think that our parents mess us up, but they protect us from how their parents messed them up,
Mhm.
which is more severe, I think. And I know that I don't have any kids, but I'm sure my sister and I are going to mess up the next generation.
We
But I
talk
think,
about that too as
yeah,
moms. Yeah, there's not a day that goes by that I'm like, ooh, maybe I shouldn't have done that, or oh man,
but but we're
But you
human,
do.
right?
Mhm.
It's a pond, it's a lake, and you're throwing a stone into it just by existing. You are affecting these kids' lives. I think the important thing is, as long as we know that we are loved, as long as we know our parents love us, as long as our parents know that we know that we are loved, I think that's what matters, because we're gonna do something.
Yeah, it's inevitable. But I think, speaking to your dad's perspective, it sounds like he wanted you to be able to handle adversity. He wanted you to be able to handle conflict, to be able to, so in his mind, he was doing the right thing. He knew how intelligent you were. He knew what was out. He grew up a certain way and wanted you to be able to manage that, and did the best that he thought he could by that tough love of, yeah.
Yeah, he loved me.
Mhm.
Simple as that. And that's
Thing that, me and Tammy have talked about it. I've talked to my 15-year-old. I'm like, I'm sure I've traumatized you somehow. You might not know it yet, but you'll find it when you're older. But like our job as parents, breaking that generational chaos, trauma, whatever you want to name it, is owning it and being able to say, I didn't handle this right, and I didn't say these things or do these things, and actually acknowledging it. Because I come from a parent who refuses to acknowledge it. And I haven't talked to her in 10 years, but I'll have that resentment when she passes, that she never acknowledged it. She always had an excuse. But we're going to acknowledge it with our kids. Your father broke that before he left, and gave you something that was so powerful. Like you said, you didn't even know that you needed that in that moment. But that's all we could do as parents. And
Yeah.
the kids, the parenting, everything changes as the world changes. There's no science to it. Yeah, just trying to do better.
Well, that's the concept of generational trauma, right? But there's another side to that coin. There's also generational love and all the gifts that come with it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, think about tying a necktie. How do we learn to do that? That's passed on from parents to children, or how to cook, like my grandma's chicken soup. I just mentioned chicken soup
Uh-huh.
before we got on this, right? Those are things that are passed on. That knowledge is passed on, and that is what makes us look. The reason the book is called Still, you called it out, right? The reason the book is called Still is that there was a period in my life, about 7 years now, that I thought life had stopped giving me things and started taking it away. It's not logical, but that's where I was emotionally. Like, look, what if we hit it off and we become friends from today? That's a gift life gives us today, right? So I lost my dad. I lost my grandma. I lost my best friend's mom. I lost my cousin who was my age. We were born a week apart. He was run over by an SUV a few years ago. I lost my little cousin from heart failure. I lost some friends. My dog.
Oh,
The relationship I thought was gonna turn into marriage, and I was just at a point where I was moving too fast to grieve. But that builds up, whether it's acne, whether it's migraines, whatever you want to call it, like it builds up, and there needs to be some release and some acknowledgement. Until I realized that we are made up of all the little pieces of everybody we've ever loved. So your favorite movie, who showed it to you? First time you tried sushi, did you think, oh, that looks good? Or did somebody say, hey, somebody you cared about say, hey, you should really try this, right? And if that's the case, they're still with me. And that's why the book is called Still. The other
hmm.
reason is that I needed to stand still to feel that. And I wasn't doing that. And it was causing me damage. So I wrote a book about it.
Yeah. And I think that it's a quick fix. If people are looking for the quick fix, hurry up and put the Band-Aid on it. Keep going, be strong, and it sounds like you got to a point. Was that your turning point with the perfectionism, the anxiety, the things that you spoke of?
No,
Was
no, I
that your
was already
turning?
doing the work. I was already doing the work.
Okay.
I have a really good friend who went to grad school with me. He's a bit older, maybe like He's early 60s now, Kurt. And he wrote the English foreword in the book. The Spanish foreword was with a good friend of ours, Inigo. But Kurt wrote the English foreword. It's because he's very important to me. He's a really good friend. And I wasn't happy. I had become, so I'll take you back a little bit. I went to school for aerospace engineering, and 6 credits short of graduating, I switched to poetry or Victorian lit, to the delight of my immigrant parents.
Sure.
Worst Thanksgiving/Christmas ever. And now you ask my mom, she's like, I always supported you. I'm like, not that fall, not that winter. But I never really rebelled, so they couldn't really tell me. They were just worried what I was going to do for money, for safety, right? And I got into a program in Cambridge, but I couldn't go because of the immigration situation. This was after September 11th. I had a student visa. How I came in, right? The guys who came and blew up the towers came in with student visas, and it was up to the discretion of the immigration official at the gate. At the time, I knew 2 people that were deported. They were not terrorists, but they were deported. So my parents talked to me, and I didn't fight them, right? Like, I didn't even say like, no, but I want to. I'm like, I understood completely. They were like, how about you finish here? All we sacrificed, can you just finish here? And I was like, cool, no problem. But I was heartbroken. I was completely heartbroken about it. I wanted to be a long-haired hippie poet in Cambridge, doing my thing. And I went fully corporate. After I graduated, healthcare. I work in healthcare. I'm a vice president for a healthcare company. And I figured, well, what industry benefits from inefficiency that they keep throwing money at it? Law and healthcare. I'll do healthcare. So I went and started working at a call center. Within a week or two, I was doing projects, and then I just started climbing. And eventually I got to a point where I was financially secure. And I got to a point where my family was financially secure if anything happened to me. No debts, property. Like, I did well for myself. But I was miserable. And I was talking to my friend Kurt about it. And he talks this way. He goes, what are you passionate about? I couldn't answer him because everything I was passionate about was in relation to somebody else. It wasn't what I was passionate about. I got a little, thank goodness he's my friend. He put up with me. I was a little upset. And he said, well, figure out what you're passionate about, because that'll lead you to your purpose. And a life of purpose is one of joy. Again, that's how he talks. So I eventually realized that I'm passionate about brain teasers, puzzles, logic games, that sort of thing. And I'm also very passionate about, like, I hope that your lives are better off. I don't know if it's narcissistic or not, because we met, right? I always believe in leaving a place better off than how you found it. Mm-hmm. And in healthcare, which I considered a failed system, which made me very unhappy, I realized I can solve complex problems every day. And that as a people leader, I can have a positive impact on the people that I oversee every day. Help them grow, help them see their own potential, give them opportunities to shine, give them opportunities to fail and learn lessons. And that made me happy. And since then, I'd been doing, and plus therapy. So since then, I've been doing the work. So when this hit me, I was in a better place than I would have been years before, but I still had to do some work in terms of dealing with grief.
Makes sense.
So I pulled your book up on Amazon. Is that your family on the cover?
See the mustache?
Oh, nice. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's my family on the cover. I chose that for the cover because I think we all have images or pictures or some sort of totem that is representative of a threshold space. So, for example, for me, that picture has a definitive before and a definitive after. There was life before that picture, and there was life after that picture, and it was never the same. I'm also a very big fan of Kendrick Lamar, and I love his albums, so it was kind of inspired me to do like that picture thing. But I think we all have that. It's something we can all relate. If you were a kid in the 90s, your family had that Sears or Woolworth picture where you had that weird background from the 90s and you all took the picture, right? So I wanted to make it relatable, but also meaningful to me.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at that picture, it does not represent a family that even went through trauma. Like, you guys truly look happy. You wouldn't think that you had the backstory you did just seeing that picture.
I don't know.
But it does. It shows the love in your family.
But I think you called out something very important, right? You can be happy and be depressed.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You can be happy and be going through something doesn't mean that it's exclusive, like it's excluded out, right? Like you can have moments of joy and periods of long lasting sadness or depression. And that's why one of the things that I wanted to do with this book, and one of the best compliments I've received on this book is when somebody reaches out to me that I don't even know on Instagram or at an open mic, and they say, hey, your books and poem here, and they name a poem, inspired me to write something. Because I think that as a generation right now, I think and generation maybe before, before and after mine, we're languishing. We're not extremely happy. We're not extremely sad, but we're just there. And I think creation, art is an antidote for that. It's a cure for that. Like there's no way, let me put it this way. I've been depressed. And the feeling that I had was I didn't want to do anything. It wasn't like I'm so sad. It's just like I just don't want to do anything. I don't want to get out of bed. I don't want to move. And I did because I had a family to take care of, as I described. But when I create, there's no room for that. It's not that I'm ignoring it. I'm just doing the opposite of it. And I find ways to enjoy it. And I think it's important for us to remember as a society and as human beings that it's so easy to tear things down. But we can create, you know?
What are some of your inspirations?
Oh, in terms of poetry?
Yeah.
Oh, Neruda. I love Pablo Neruda. Just fantastic poet, Chilean poet. The reason I'm fascinated with him, he was actually part of my thesis in my thesis project in school. And the reason for that is he was a surrealist poet, used very highbrow language. And then he went through the Spanish Civil War and his friends were murdered. And he became a staunch socialist. And then he took that and he went from like, I can write the saddest verses tonight to Ode to a Sock. And he used language that was very accessible to people without high reading comprehension to put forth the abstract ideals of socialism to the point that it led to the first democratically elected socialist president in the Western Hemisphere, which was Salvador Allende. In his commencement speech, in his inauguration speech, he credited Neruda saying he made this possible. That's the power of word. Or like Louise Bennett, who is a Jamaican poet, who they still, if you go to Air Jamaica, I think she's still Channel 2, her NPR show or her NPR type show. And she helped turn Jamaican patois, Creole, into their national language, right? Like that's the importance of poetry. Like you can make huge systematic changes. So that's why, and plus he's just great at love poems. So I love Neruda, right? Great descriptor. Wisława Szymborska, Polish Nobel laureate for poetry. She was a fantastic poet that has this poem called Vocabulary that starts off with La Pologne, is it terribly cold there? Somebody talking to her, is it terribly cold in Poland? And she goes into this huge description of like why people do the writing in mittens and icicles and walruses and all that stuff. And then she says, I forgot the word for icicle and I'm not sure about mittens. So she just says pas du tout. A little bit, not so much. And it shows how much is lost in translation. But it also shows that after World War II, around the time the poem was written, there were so many different countries that were popping up that it was hard to understand each other. There's so much nuance there. And then there's Bukowski, who's just like, I don't care about anything. It's about poetry and like those are some of my favorites.
Do you, when you're creating, I'm hearing you say that helps with depression, it helps with anxiety, kind of pulls you out of that. Did I hear you accurately on that?
Yeah.
Sure. What, for our listeners, what kinds of advice do you have for people experiencing anxiety and depression and just what you said about your family picture? Like, yes, it's a picture. There was life before, there was life after. That's a picture. That's a snapshot in time, but it doesn't mean that there wasn't depression going on, or an argument that happened right after the picture was taken, or just life happens. What kinds of advice do you have for people to acknowledge what's going on, to feel what's going on, to be still in their lives, to experience it, to work through it? I don't know. What would you say?
Don't be a passive don't be passive in your own life. Don't be a passive observer in your life. Live it. Go out, travel, even if it's just, walking to the next neighborhood, talk to somebody you don't know, get to know someone, read a book, eat really good food, just like go out and experience life, because there's so much outside the four walls we inhabit. And it opens up universes for you. As an example, like I speak Spanish, English. I used to speak fluent Italian and Portuguese, and I'm not as fluent anymore, but I can still read it and write it. I used to speak French as well. I met a girl in Paris, fell in love, dated for 2 years. So I spent a lot of time in France, and I didn't want to be the dumb boyfriend who was like, mm-hmm, where? We, you know? So I definitely learned that language, and I was pretty, maybe like fifth grade reading, which is not bad when I was immersed in it. And what that allows me to do is when I mentioned I do complex problems at work every day because because I know different languages, I can think about it in different perspectives. When I think about something in Spanish, it's definitely much more of an emotional solution that I provide because that's what it is for me. But when it's English, it's much more logical because that's the language where I went to school, where I learned more things. But when I get mad, you better believe my internal monologue is in Spanish, right? So it's interesting. And then there's some things that are Italian and some things that are Portuguese, and there are definitely some things that are French. Like I have a friend of mine who's staying with me right now. She's from Germany, and she was making fun of my German R because I keep doing the from France. And so it's just you just confuse all of these things, but it allows you to see things from different perspectives. It allows you to think of things from different angles. And I think that just makes you a much more complete person. It makes you somebody that can empathize with somebody else. Art, that's the other thing. Go and take art. Like go to the museum, go read a great book, go see a great play, go create something on your own, because art creates an analytical relationship between yourself and an object, right? A play like The Rhinoceros doesn't do really well in the US, but the Super Bowl does well. I have nothing against the Super Bowl. I watch it myself. But it is a very entertainment, us versus them mentality versus the nuances and complexities of why are we doing this? And they just had a great play. Do I really want them to get injured? Am I that type of person? You know what I mean? Like those little nuances of it's not considered shocking to call for the death of your opponent when you're watching a basketball game, right?
Go for the knees.
But do you really want to do that to someone else? I'm gonna venture to say that no, you wouldn't.
Right.
Like if there weren't things like not to get into politics, but like just like guns, for example. I grew up in a military family. I know how to handle guns. I'm very good with them. I don't like them because what it does, I don't want to be responsible for. Now, whether I need it, if I'm going to be in a heightened situation, all that, that's a separate topic. But it's just, I think that there are mechanisms that allow us to be desensitized and lack empathy in terms of dealing with somebody else. And I think art helps you build that empathy. Traveling helps you build that empathy. Engaging with other people helps you build that empathy. And wherever you are on the political spectrum, whatever you think of where we are right now, we are dealing with complex issues, complex problems. Climate change, whether you believe in it or not, this was the last hottest summer on record. That's a fact, right? We're only going to solve these things together, not apart, together. And I think art helps us bridge that gap, which is why I use a lot of these concepts from art, from my education in it, at work, in team building and problem solving.
Mm-hmm. And I think with anxiety, at least for sure, you're thinking about what's going to happen to me, what my worst case scenario, what if, how's this going to play out, just that snowball effect of feeling out of control. And I'm hearing you say that by getting out of yourself, educating yourself, learning other people's cultures, having empathy for somebody else, all of those things are getting out of your internal self, and which is a perfect remedy for anxiety. You can't be empathetic about somebody else and have a panic attack at the same time. So I think, I think that education, the adaptability that you spoke of, and having the empathy, those are, I love how you wove those concepts together.
Could I ask you two a question?
Yeah.
What role has art played in your lives? Have you ever been impacted by a great book or by a great play or a movie or a painting or anything? And how has that affected you?
So my family, my husband and my children are very artistic. They've impacted me as far as like, because all three of them are dyslexic. And so to see things through their eyes and see their creativity is a huge joy to me. As far as my own personal stuff, music was always a go-to for me. I grew up in a very trauma household. And music was just words I could never find they could just trigger so many emotions. And I mean, that was the extent of art for me. We didn't do like art galleries or anything like that. I do love reading. Couple books stand out that I have reread 100 times. But that's for me. What about you, Jamie?
We grew up, my mom's side is very creative, musically inclined. Her grandfather played piano like no other. My mom can play piano. It's just magic when she sits down. I had to do piano lessons, but I've got that personality of don't tell me what to do. I'll do it when I'm ready. So yeah, my dad he's a colonel in the Air Force. So he always wanted me to go into the military. I'm like, I don't think that's going to be a good fit for me. But I think that my older son, he is in school right now in college for music business, and he writes music and sings, performs. And I think that, I've gone to concerts where I just get goosebumps when I'm just hearing like the music and how just the voice I just think it's so moving. I've got playlists on my phone. I've got happy ones. When I'm in a bad mood, I got to put my happy playlist on to kind of snap me out of things. My mom is super artistic. She paints and just creates anything and everything. So I think that creativity, and no matter what it looks like, creation of art, music, dance, it was a huge part of my life.
Yeah,
And I'm a marketing. I own a marketing agency, so I mean,
there you go.
Well,
But it seems like when I hear your story, Desiree, and when I hear your story, Tammy, it's all these moments are like you're tapping into reserves of energy for yourselves, right? Like it's something that nurtures you, right? Which is why it's so important. And it's the reason I asked that question. I ask that of a lot of people when I start talking to them. It's some people don't realize what a balm it could be for the soul, right? Like when you are, let's say you're going through heartbreak, you mentioned music, you know that there's some breakup songs, right? You know there's some breakup songs that you just got to hear again and again, even if it hurts so, you know what I mean? Or like, or what you mentioned in terms of like, haven't you ever just busted out dancing alone because you just felt you needed to, right? I honestly think that if God exists, he, she, it, whatever God is, it's between us right now communicating, connecting. That's where the divine is. right? And I think that's why it's so important to go back to it in order to solve these issues, instead of saying, oh, you're not worth it as a person because you don't agree with my idea on this, or more than idea, my feeling on this, my uninformed feeling
Mhm.
on this thing. So I'm going to completely dismiss you, and I'm going to completely disassociate from your suffering. That's a problem.
And I'm going to be mean
Said
to
that
you.
somebody.
Sorry.
I said that to somebody yesterday in a conversation about, it was about politics, but it was like, you need to remove emotion from it. Like, this is about policy, not popularity. Because when you're going from a popularity stance, there is no knowledge there. It is solely based on your feeling. And the policies are kind of the logic, because so I have a degree in law. I did not take my bar, but I'm big on reading like bills and policies, and like, I don't care what the headlines say, they're there for a purpose. I like to have, in the same aspect, like you sought out knowledge, and I'm very much that way when it comes to super important things, and I feel like that lacks across the board and shows in so many different ways. So, but nobody will ever agree, even though I think your philosophy on it is the way it should be.
Thank you for that. I mean, and again, I don't know if I have an answer for it. It's just what's worked for me, right? Like the concept of torture. I think it's wrong, period. I think torture, period, is wrong when you have the upper hand on anybody, whether it be at the playground and you're holding somebody, a bully that was taking you down, and you're completely overpowered, and now you're going to hurt that person. Like, it turns you into something that you were the victim of. I think stuff like that is wrong, right? And I do, again, go back to art as being the reason why I realize that, I recognize that, and I don't want to be a part of that. I want to be a part of changing that.
So what does the future look like for Renzo? Like, are you going to write more? Are you?
The future. So what the future looks like for me, I have some podcasts to do to promote the book, just to try to get into as many hands as possible, just because I want people to read. I want people to read poetry, even if it's like, we don't like yours, okay, but you read it, good. Now go find something you like,
Mhm.
right? So I'm going to do that. Um, Probably, like, I would love to do a TED Talk on this. And I have a couple of friends who suggested that and put that idea in my head. And I had that whole like self-limiting belief, like, me, a TED Talk, I don't know if I can do that. I can. It's a conversation. I can hold conversations. And a TED Talk on art as collaboration, art as building community, art as empathy, art as a means to bridge gaps, right? I that's something that I'm looking forward to doing, and I'm putting it out there now, so I better at least try
Yeah.
in terms of that. But in terms of writing, I do have more poems. I could probably put together another collection relatively soon, but I've also recently I was invited to do a short story, which meant a lot to me, and it was very well received, thankfully. And it gave me an idea for either a novel or a book of short stories if I can't make the literary device work that would turn it into a novel. So there's that. And other than that, plan a trip, go eat good food, meet good people, fall in love, fall out of love. I don't know. We'll do it all. Live. That's what I'm gonna do in the future. I'm gonna live.
Love that.
That's awesome.
Well, I'm excited to check out your book. Definitely
you.
gonna get my hands on that. It sounds wonderful.
Mhm. Well, we will link your book below, and your information and stuff like that, so that people can go and check it out and grab it. We thank you so much for being a guest with us. And when you write another one or your next venture, you come back and visit us and keep us up to date.
Yeah,
Love that.
and if I just take a moment, thank you guys again for providing a platform, for being excellent conversationalists, for making me feel comfortable. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you. Well, we wish you the best, and I know you're gonna continue doing great things because you believe in it and that's your passion. So, all right. Thank you so much. I'm gonna stop recording.